and I'll mention the three classes of levers. What we call the class 1 lever is the typical lever that we've been drawing that multiplies the force. You have an input force and you have an output force, or it could be the other way around. You could have the lever like this, in which case you have the input force on the short end and the output force on the long end. In this first case, you get a mechanical advantage. In the second case, you get a mechanical disadvantage. In the first case, you get your output force moving at a decreased distance, and in the second case, you get an increased distance. But in either case, this multiplies either the force or the distance, and it changes the direction. It multiplies the force or the distance. You see both cases there, multiplying the force or multiplying the distance. And it changes the direction. And we mean that it changes the direction of the force. The input force is down, the output force is up. So this is a class 1 lever. So a seesaw, for example, would be a class 1 lever. A class 2 lever is the one where you have the board against the ground and you're lifting a mass, something like this. So you put in an input force here and you get an output force there. In this case, it multiplies the force we get a larger output force than we put in. We can label these in and out, but the direction is the same. So that's a class 2 lever. We've multiplied the force, but we keep the direction the same. That's a class 2 lever. And then a class 3 lever would be like a broom. And this is what we looked at earlier. You have an object that can rotate about a hinge, and you can apply an input force and you get an output force down here. So we'll say in and out. In this case, it multiplies the distance. It multiplies the distance. It does so at the cost of having a lesser output force. But again, it's the same direction. So a broom or a rake would be a class 3 lever. A simple example. Now this classification, class 1, class 2, and class 3, I don't think is particularly useful. I'm not going to make a big deal about that, but you should just know that those exist. When you hear someone talking about a class 2 lever or a class 3 lever, they're just talking about one of these types of levers, and these are the specific variations on a lever. The main thing to understand about a lever isn't whether it's a class 1, class 2, or class 3. The main thing is to have a conceptual understanding of how the input force is going to result in a certain output force based on the ratio of the distances, and being able to understand the mechanical advantage or disadvantage that a lever gives you. That's far more important than being able to name whether it's class 1, class 2, or class 3.